Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'll be showing you how to create what I'm calling this peeled typography look. It's kind of like the paper cutout tutorial, but the letters here look like they're peeled up from the page and it's revealing a photo underneath, and we have some drop shadow going on here as well. I'll be using GIMP 2.10.14 for this tutorial, which is the latest version of GIMP at the time of this video. But of course, before I get into that, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, I have tons of GIMP and Inkscape tutorials on here, as well as my GIMP book of layers and GIMP and Inkscape help articles, so definitely check those out. You can enroll in my GIMP 2.10 Masterclass from beginner to pro photo editing on Udemy. You can enroll in any of my Skillshare classes by visiting gimpschool.com, or you can get more with a premium membership to Davies Media Design. Your premium membership includes access to my GIMP Help Center app, my GIMP Book of Layers ebook, as well as other premium content not found on YouTube. You can start your premium membership with a 7-day free trial, and I'll include a link to this, as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. Alright, so I'll be using a couple of free photos to help supplement this tutorial today. They are both from Pixabay. So there's this photo of a galaxy. Just click free download and go with the 1920 by 1280 version. And I have this paper texture photo, so just click on the free download button again and go with the 1280 by 1920. I'll also be using a free font, which you can get from this article I wrote here on the 10 best free fonts for GIMP. These are from Google Fonts, and if you scroll down here, the bottom one is Ubuntu. You can just click on the image right here, and that will take you to the free font download. And I also have an article on how to download free fonts for GIMP, whether you're using Windows or Mac, so I'll link those articles in the description of the video. So I'll minimize this. Here again is the final result. So there's a lot going on here, and I will be covering some more advanced techniques in this tutorial, but I'm going to do it in a way that beginners should be able to follow. There's also going to be some parts of this that will be sped up just to shorten this tutorial a little bit, keep it from getting too long. If you want to see the full version without any of it being sped up, definitely become a premium member on my website and you can have access to that tutorial. Alright, so let's start by opening up a new composition. I'll go to File, New, and I'm going to go with 1920 by 1080. The unit is going to be pixels here, and I'll click OK. I'll hold Control and use my mouse wheel to zoom out a little bit on the composition. So right now our background color is black. You will want to decide what your final background color is going to be ahead of time. In this case, I'm going to go with a yellow color, but for now we actually want to fill this background color in with a contrasting color, and you'll see why in a couple minutes here, but for now we're just going to fill this in with a blue color instead, because that'll be a nice contrasting color. So here you can see the yellow I want to use ultimately, but instead I'm just going to go with a random blue color here. We're not going to end up using this for anything in the end, so it doesn't really matter what exact color it is. I'll just click OK, and I'll hit Shift B or click to grab my bucket fill tool and just fill in that background color with that blue. Again, this is only temporary, so don't worry if you don't like the color right now. But next I'm going to come over and grab my text tool, and this part does matter. So again, the font I'm using is Ubuntu Bold. You can get this font for free from my article, which I will link to this video. If you want to change the font, you can just click on here and then click on this little icon. That'll open up your text in this little dialog over here, and you can search through the various fonts. So I went with Ubuntu Bold. I'll come back over here to my layers panel. So I want to set my color for my font to be the yellow color I'm going to be using in the end. And again, I'm not trying to confuse you guys, but the background color here will be yellow. So we want our font color to be a slightly lighter yellow, and this is just going to make it look like the light is hitting it and therefore making it a little bit lighter or brighter. And you'll see as we get later into this tutorial how that works. So what I'll do is I'm just going to click on this foreground color here. I, of course, imported all the yellows I wanted to use for this tutorial ahead of time. This will ultimately be my background color, and so this is the HTML notation. You'll have an opportunity to copy that later. This is going to be my lighter color that I'm going to use for my text, so go ahead and copy that, enter that into the HTML notation area there, and click OK. So now you'll have a slightly lighter yellow for your text. And I'm going to also set the size of my text to 250. This is going to be a little bit larger than the original composition I did. I just want to test out and see how this looks. And I'm going to turn my caps lock key on, click anywhere on my composition, and I'll just type in open, hit the enter key and type in source. And I have the letters justify here to the center, as you can see right here. Next, I want to align this up a little bit better on the page, and actually I'm going to increase my text size before I do that. So with my text box still selected, I'll hit Control A, and let's see what this looks like a little larger. So I'll go with 300. I actually like that a little bit better. And I also have my letters spread out a bit, so this option right here allows you to adjust the letter spacing. So I have this turned up to 20. I'm also going to decrease the amount of line spacing here. So this is the spacing between the top and bottom line. So I'll just decrease that a little bit so they're a little closer. I don't want to make them too much closer. Let's go with -40 for now. So we have our text set up. Now what I want to do is align this on the page. So I'm going to grab the alignment tool, make sure this is aligned relative to the image, and click on our text box, and then just click to align this both at the center of target horizontally and vertically. So now our letters are aligned on the center of the page. All right, so that was sort of the easy part of this tutorial. Now we get into some of the more advanced stuff. We're going to make it look like the letters have been peeled back. You know, maybe somebody cut them out of a piece of paper, peeled them back, and then there's a light source hitting it, so there's a drop shadow coming off of the letters. So to do that, I need to actually separate each one of these letters here. So I need them all in their own separate layer. And what I'll do for that is grab my text tool again, make sure your settings are the same, at least for the font size and the color. You're just going to click anywhere on your composition and type in the first letter, so there's the O. And I'm just going to do that for each letter here in the composition. Doesn't really matter where you click and type this, because we're going to move them later. So there's the first line and then the second line. I'm just clicking and then typing a single letter and just doing that across the page here. It might duck down a little bit below the page, that's all right. I'll show you how to fix that in a second. So once we've done that, we're going to grab the move tool, and now we're just going to move each one of these individual layers of text into place so they're in the proper position here. So with my move tool selected, and I'm making sure I'm on the layer option, I'm just going to move these letters roughly into place. It won't be exact yet. Just like that. And make sure you're hovered over the actual pixels that contain the text here, so the yellow pixels inside the text. Otherwise, you'll move the layer below like that. I'll hit Control Z to undo that. And then for this last one, I can grab it right here, but let's say I couldn't. Let's say it was all the way off the page. If you're using GIMP 2.10.14, you can use the Show All feature, and that'll show everything outside of your canvas. To do that, we can go to View, Show All, and now you can see the letter down here, and now I can click and drag that up here, and I can come back to View, Show All, and turn that back off. All right, so I'll hold Control and zoom in using my mouse wheel, and now I'm going to get more into the minutia here. I'm just going to drag this into place, and right now it's actually kind of hard to tell whether or not these letters are aligned, so I'm going to come down to the original text box here that contains the full 2 lines of text, grab my text tool, click inside that text box, hit Control A to select all the text, and let's just temporarily change this to white. So now that makes it a little bit easier, so I'll grab my move tool, zoom in again, and now we can move this into place. So once it's lined up, you can release your mouse, use the space bar and your mouse to move over on the page. And you can always click on the letter itself and then click on it once and use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move it over, you know, in any direction by a small amount. So I'll move over here and I'll drag the E now. And they don't have to be totally perfect. If they're 1 pixel off, you know, that's okay. So I'll click on the end here, click on this once and use the up arrow to adjust that. So hold Control and zoom out. There's the first line of text. Let's go down to the second line. And I'm just doing the same thing, just dragging each piece of text into place. If you need to adjust it by any number of pixels, just click on it once and use the arrow keys on your keyboard. All right, so hold Control and zoom out. So now you'll see we have our letters in place. Next, what we need to do is change the perspective of these letters so that they look like they're being peeled off the page like you saw in the final version of this composition. So hold Control and zoom in. Let's start with the O here. So I'll click on the O, and the problem is that we can't just go right into using the perspective tool. We need to shrink the layer down. So I'll just go to Layer, Crop to Content, and that'll crop it down. It'll also erase the text information on here, so it'll just convert the text layer to a normal layer now. And then if I hit Shift P on my keyboard or come over here and click on the perspective tool, that will add the perspective tool on here. I don't want to adjust this yet because I want to make sure that each one of these has relatively the same perspective. So what I'll do is I'll come up top and just click and drag, and that allows me to drag a ruler. And I'm just going to place this a little bit above the text, and then I'll drag a second one. This will be a little bit above the bottom of the text here, like so. So you guys can set this to whatever you want. But now what I'll do, now that I have these set up, is I'll just click and drag the perspective tool over to the left, and I'll do the same for both the top and the bottom. We're not going to touch these ones over here because that's basically what's making this look hinged over here. And you can drag this over as little or as much as you want. I recommend keeping this fairly in line. You can make it look like this, you know, if you want it to be really warped in perspective. But for me, I just liked having these two pretty much in line with each other, and then I'll now hit transform. So there's the first letter. I'll hold Control and zoom out. We'll work on the P now. I'm gonna do two of these, so I'll do the O and the P, and then I'm gonna fast forward through the other ones. Again, you can subscribe to be a premium member on my website, and you can see the slow-mo, or I should say the regular speed version of this entire tutorial. So I'll come over here, click on the P again, go to Layer, Crop to Content, click on that P, and now I'm going to drag the top right and the bottom right corners of the perspective. I'm basically doing a little bit past halfway on the letter, so I would say the halfway mark is probably right here on the P. So I'm a little bit to the right of that, and then I'm making sure that these two are relatively aligned, like so. And I'll hit transform. It's okay if these two aren't totally perfect, but there you can see the first two there. And now I'm going to move through and do each one of these letters here. So we're on the bottom line of text here. We need to set up the guides again, just like we did for the top line. That way everything on the bottom line is going to match up in terms of perspective. So once again, I'll click and drag a guide from the top here. You can also just use the existing guides on here, but I'm going to drag some new guides. And I'm basically just eyeballing it so it's fairly similar to the distance the guide has up top here. And I'll do the same for the bottom portion, maybe about right there. So I've gone to Layer, Crop to Content for this S layer, and I still have my perspective tool. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to do the same thing I did for the top layer, making sure that these two are relatively aligned. And I'll hit transform, and I'll do the rest for the other letters. So hold Control and use my mouse to zoom out. All right, so we finished making it appear as if the letters had been cut out and swung open. Obviously, we have work to do to make this look a little bit more realistic, so let's get into that portion of the tutorial now. For starters, what I'll do is I'll change the color of the background layer here. So I'm going to scroll down here to the bottom, click on background, come over here and click on this yellow color. Let's go with that darker yellow so you guys can copy this HTML notation right there, and I'll click OK. Shift B to grab the bucket fill tool. And now with this bucket fill tool, making sure it's set to foreground color fill, I'm just going to click on the background. So that will change the color of my background to that yellow color. Also, what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of a gradient to this background so that it looks like there is a light source affecting that background color. So I'll come over here to the gradient tool and come down here and make sure this is set to foreground to transparent. Our foreground color, of course, being this yellow color. And I recommend clicking this little reverse icon so that the color is on the right side. And you can see I have my opacity here turned down a little bit, so it's not set to 100, it's set a little bit lower, something like 29%, 30%. And the mode of this is set to multiply, so there's a little drop down here, you can change the mode. I'm going to select the shape and set it to linear. And then while on my background layer, I'm going to click and drag this from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. And you can always play around here with the reverse button to see which one you like better. And I'm just going to also increase the opacity here a little bit. So maybe go up to something like 60 or so. So that looks pretty good. So now if I click on the gradient here, so I just clicked on this little plus icon and hit the enter key, that will apply my gradient. And now you can see we have a little bit of a gradient happening here where it's lighter in the top left and slightly darker in the bottom right. I'm going to hit the M key to grab my move tool, and I don't need these guides right now, so I'm just going to move them out of the way. If I drag and drop them off of the active canvas here, it's going to make them disappear. So here you can see our composition is starting to come together. The next step is I need to sort of hole punch where the letters are. That way we can reveal another photo below this layer of text and the background layer. So that's what's going to give this a little bit more depth. To do that, I'll need to create a layer mask, and it's going to be in the shape of the text. So I'll click on this layer here that had both lines of text, so the white text. I'm going to Alt click on that. That'll create a selection. Then I'll click on the background layer. Right click, go to Add Layer Mask. Under Initialize Layer Mask 2, I'll choose Selection, and I'm going to hit the Invert Mask option. And then I'll click Add, and what that will do, you can't see it right now, I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that. You can also go to Select None. And if I hide the text layer, you'll see now this has been sort of hole punched here. You should see this gray checkerboard behind here, which represents transparency. If not, undo that last step, right click, go to Add Alpha Channel, and then redo that step of adding your layer mask. But now we can bring in another photo and we can put it behind here, and that's going to reveal whatever design we want behind this little hole punch area. So I'll come over here and go to File, and I'll go to Open as Layers. And in my case, I used the photo I want to use recently, so it's right here, and I'll click Open. So here we have this galaxy, and if I click and drag this below the background layer, you'll see now this little hole punch area will reveal that galaxy. I can always hold the Shift key and click. That allows me to select the lowest layer, and I can just move this layer around until I get it in the placement I want. So maybe about right here, and we'll just leave that there for now. All right, so we have the main structure of our design. It's time to start adding some of those little details to make this look more realistic. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to make the little cutout area, the hole punch area as I've been calling it, look a little bit more 3D, a little bit more dynamic. To do that, I'll come over here to my background layer. I'm going to duplicate this once, and I'm going to right click on this layer and go to Apply Layer Mask. So that will basically merge the layer mask with the photo, so that if I shift click on this little eye icon, you'll see this is what the layer looks like right now. There's no layer mask, so it's been merged together with the layer. I'll hit Shift and click on this little eye icon again and just re-hide this text layer. Next, what I'll do is I'll come over to Filters, Lighten Shadow, Long Shadow, and I'm going to change the color here to black. So I'll just click on that little color box and move that all the way down to the bottom left corner, and I'll click OK. Obviously this doesn't look right, so I'm going to turn the length down a little bit first. And I can also adjust the angle of this. So I'll just go with about right there, so somewhere around 70 for now. I actually want to decrease the length a little bit more. So maybe we'll go with around 10. That looks pretty good right there. So now you can see it's added a little bit of depth already on its own, so I'll click OK. I'll have to duplicate this layer again, so I'll duplicate the background layer. And let me just rename this Shadow instead of Background Copy. And actually Background Shadow is probably more appropriate. And I'm going to click and drag this layer up top above the background shadow layer. And I'm going to right click on it and go to Apply Layer Mask. So it's the same thing we did before with this layer here. Now what I'll do is I'll Alt click, and that's going to select everything outside of the hole punch area. So all of this stuff is currently selected right now. And then what I'll do is I'll hit Control I. That's going to invert the selection area so that only inside the text is now selected. So the open source text is now selected here. It's now outlined by a selection area. Then I'll come over to Select, Grow, and I'll just grow this by 5 pixels here and click OK. Then I'll go to Select, Feather, and I'm going to feather this by 10 pixels. Click OK. Then I'll create a new layer, and I'm going to name this Emboss. And make sure it's filled with transparency for now, and I'll click OK. Then I'll hit Shift B to grab my bucket fill tool. I'll click on this little icon here and switch my color to white for the foreground color. And I'm just going to fill in the selection area. So if you have a little glitch area like that, you may just have to hit Control Shift A, that'll deselect everything, and then come over and grab your eraser tool and just sort of erase around that area, and that should get rid of that. So I'll grab my Move tool, and I'll hold Control and zoom in a little bit using my mouse wheel. So while this emboss layer is still selected, what I'll do is come over to Filters, Distorts, Emboss. Make sure your little preview icon is checked, so you'll see this will create this sort of 3D lettering here. I just have everything set to the default for this, and I'll click OK. Then what I'll do with this emboss layer selected is come over here to the mode, and I'm going to scroll down here. You can sort of cycle through all of these layer modes to see which one you like the best. I actually liked the darken only one the best for this particular case. So you can just use your mouse wheel up top here like so to see which one you like the best. I'll hold Control and zoom in. This doesn't quite look right in some areas, so what I did is I just sort of decreased the opacity of this a tiny bit to help it blend in a little bit better. So maybe somewhere around 75 or so. And you can always adjust that later. So that's what's giving this sort of a raised look, as if the edges of what could be a piece of paper are sort of coming up a bit. All right, so we've done all this to make this look realistic and maybe as if it's been cut out of paper, but we don't have that sort of real paper texture on here. So now we're going to use that paper photo that I showed you at the beginning of the tutorial. It's going to be linked in the description of this video. So I need to open it up as a layer, so I'll go to File, Open as Layers. And in my case, I can go to Recently Used, and here is a paper texture, and I'll click Open. So hold Control and zoom out a little bit. Of course, this is not facing the right way, so what I'll have to do is grab my Rotate tool. Make sure the Transform option is set to Layer. I'm just going to click and drag my mouse, and if I hold the Shift key, I can drag in 15-degree increments, and I'm just going to drag it until we're at -90 degrees and click Rotate. And you can click and drag this layer so it's below all of the text layers. So you can see this is just above the emboss layer right now. And I can double click on this and rename it Paper Texture and hit the Enter key. I'll hold Control and zoom in. Of course, this doesn't look great, so I'll come over to my layer mode, and I'm just going to change this to Overlay. That looks a lot better, but the colors are still slightly off, so I'll come over here to Colors, Levels, and I'm just going to click and drag my levels until I get a better color. So you can see this is looking a lot better now. And I can also drag in the highlight slider here and the midtone slider until I get the color I want. So there's a before, there is an after, and I'll click OK. You can also decrease the opacity of this to help it blend a little better, like that. All right, we've made some real progress here. It's time to add some of the finishing touches, which is going to really include the shading here. So we want to add some shadows coming off of the text as if there is a light source here in the top left corner or somewhere in that general direction. So we want the shadows coming off the letters here. What I'll do is I'll come up top here to this first letter, which is going to be the O, and I'll come over here and duplicate it. And then I'm just going to double click and name this O shadow and hit the Enter key. I'm going to click and drag this below the original O layer, and I need to change the color of this. So right now it's this yellow color, but I need it to be black. So what I'll do is I'll click here to lock the alpha channel. That's going to lock all of the transparent areas, and the reason I want to do that is if I come over here and grab this black color, so I clicked on it and I'm holding my mouse and I drag it over here and release, That's going to color only the colored pixels that are already on this layer with that black color. So that's just going to be the O shape here. And you can see it over here in the little thumbnail. And once I've done that, I can come back up here and unlock that. So now our alpha channel is unlocked again. And next I need to change the perspective of this so it looks like it's a shadow being cast in this general direction. First, I'll grab a guide from up top and I'm going to drag it down. So I'll place one here a little below the top portion of our lettering. And I'll grab another one and it's going to be a little bit below the bottom portion of the lettering like that. So it's basically the exact opposite of what we did at the beginning of the tutorial when we created the perspective. And once again, I will grab this perspective tool and I'll click on this letter. And now I'm going to drag the bottom right corner and the top right corner. And I'm going to hold Control and zoom in. So I want this to overlap a little bit with the letter to the right of it. So we want it to overlap with the P a little bit. And once again, I'm going to make these align right here. So that looks pretty good. And I'll hit the transform button. So there we have our shadow, but the problem of course is that it ducks underneath the P and it should be on top of it. So what we have to do is come over here to our layers panel and just click and drag each one of these layers. So we're basically reversing the order of the lettering that we did earlier. And you can also, if you prefer, click on this and use little down arrows and that will move these below. I don't want to move it too far below. I prefer to click and drag and then drop it. Just like that. So as you can see when we did that, the shadow here on the O is now properly on top of the P. So we'll come back up here to the O shadow layer. We need to now make this look a little bit fuzzier. Right now the lines of this are too harsh, but if we do that, it's going to go outside of the layer boundary. So for each one of these, we're going to have to come over here to layer, layer to image size, and that will increase the size of the layer. And then I'll go to filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and I just turn this up to around 6.5, like so. Click OK. And the last step is to just decrease the opacity. I went with something around 26, so like that. And now you can see we have a shadow there. So we're going to repeat that for all these letters. So once again, I'm going to do this on the P lettering again, just so you guys get a good idea of how to do this. And then I'm going to fast forward through this unless you are a Premiere member. So on the P, we're going to duplicate that, drag this below the original. We'll rename this shadow, hit the enter key. We're going to lock the alpha channel, click and drag the black onto that P. We'll come over to the perspective, click on this, hold Control, zoom in with the mouse, and we're just going to drag the top right and the bottom right. Make sure they're fairly aligned and make sure that this is somewhat overlapping with the letter to the right of it and hit transform. We'll go to layer, layer to image size, filters. In this case, we can go to repeat Gaussian blur because it's going to be the same. And make sure before you do that, of course, you unlock the alpha channel, so don't forget that step. Filters, repeat Gaussian blur. There it is. Now we can decrease the opacity of it. And there we go. All right, so I'm going to continue this for the other letters. And for this letter, since it's all the way to the right, we're going to use the letter down here as a reference point for how far we want to drag the perspective here. So we're going to drag it about right there so you can see it's just overlapping this letter hypothetically down there. Of course, it's not overlapping anything up here, but it just makes sure that all these are approximately the same length. And now for the second line of text, we'll do the same thing. I'm just going to reset the guides here. Let me hit Control Z actually. I'm going to grab new guides. So we'll just make sure they're approximately in the same area as before. Go with about right there. So come up top. I'm going to duplicate the S layer, drag it below, rename this to S shadow, hit the enter key, lock the alpha channel, drag the black onto this and release. You can unlock the alpha channel right after that. That'll keep you from forgetting. Grab the perspective tool, click on this. We're going to click and drag the perspective, hold control and zoom in with the mouse. So drag the top right and the bottom right until it's just barely overlapping here. Make sure these two are even. Hit transform. Filters, repeat Gaussian blur. If the Gaussian blur doesn't work, make sure you are unlocked here with the alpha channel, and then turn down the opacity. So I'll finish up here with the rest of the letters. And the last letter here is the E. So there's nothing to sort of reference for the E off to the right here. So we're just going to really guesstimate where, or how far off we want the perspective to be. And so I'll just do this one last letter here. So I'll duplicate this, rename this E shadow, come back and rename this E number 1 shadow because there are 2 E's in here. And I'm going to click and drag this below, lock the alpha channel, drag and drop the black, unlock the alpha channel, click on this with the perspective, and I'm just going to guess how far out this is going to be. Probably be about right here. Hit transform, then go to layer, layer to image size, filters, repeat Gaussian blur, and we're going to decrease the opacity. I'll hold control and zoom out, and we can zoom in a bit more. Grab the move tool and let's just remove the guides here. The very last detail I'll add to this is a vignette layer, and that's just going to bring this all together and make it look nice and professional. So I'll scroll up to the top and I'm just going to create a new layer. So I did click on that top layer, create a new layer, rename this vignette, click OK. Then we'll go to filters, light and shadow, vignette. And I'm going to adjust the radius so that the harsh part of the vignette goes just outside the corners of the composition. And I'll click OK. And there we go. You can hit Control S to save this as an XCF file, which will save this with all of the layers intact. Or you can go to File, Export As, or hit Control Shift E. That will export this as something like a JPEG or a PNG, whatever file type you want to export this to, but of course the layers won't be intact. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, you could subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. Don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified each time I have a brand new tutorial. You can also check out any of the links to my resources in the description of the video, but thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.